23 anti-tank guns per kilometer? Wait, that's one every 43 or so meters, right? That's a lot. So is he going to go around them? No. Huh. Wow. I bet that's going to hurt. Okay. Yeah, bye. June 18th, 1943. Work to your strengths. Let's say you know where your enemy is going to attack you, but not when. But you figure you have time to build at least some defenses. What strength do you have that can help? If you're the Soviet Union, you have an enormous population, so you put them to work building defenses. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. And now, this. That's right. 9 out of 10 doctors recommend joining the Time Ghost Army.
Be an angel and come and help.
I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Allies stopped the Japanese in central China and in the air over Guadalcanal. They also took the Mediterranean island of Pantelleria. The islands of Lampedusa, Linosa, and Lampione fall the 12th, 13th, and 14th, respectively. This is the rest of Operation Corkscrew. Lampedusa takes a pretty heavy naval and aerial bombardment. Lampione is uninhabited. There are now no military obstacles for the Allies between Tunisia and Sicily. They have 600 planes on Malta as well by now, flying out from newly built fields. There was, in fact, an excess of aircraft available to the Allies, although the same was not true with respect to the available fuel and ordnance. Indeed, the air campaign against Pantelleria consumed so much in the way of necessary bombs and gasoline that only just sufficient supplies of these materials were available for the Sicilian operation. The main targets from the beginning of this week forward are the Axis air bases on Sicily. There are around 30 of them, and they can accommodate 600 or so planes. Already when the bombing campaign gets going, the raids are not heavily opposed by the enemy, and they start destroying a fair amount of planes on the ground, and some of the airfields themselves. The islands they've taken, especially Pantelleria, are important. That island is really the first active task needed to launch Operation Husky, the upcoming Allied invasion of Sicily. Pantelleria is a little volcanic island that's been closed to foreigners since 1926 when the Italians started beefing up its defenses. Since it has a bunch of airfields, it's a threat to any force assaulting Sicily and can spot and ruin any tactical surprise coming from Africa. And it also has only one possible landing site from the sea, at the northwest of the island, and has been a refueling station for Axis submarines. So yeah, taking this without losses was important for a variety of reasons. And though, as I said, the main target for bombings is Sicily, there are plenty of air attacks on Sardinia and Greece to obscure what the actual target is to be. And today, the 18th, heavy attacks begin on Messina and the ports across the straits. And they make runs on the Axis Communication Center, Napoli. There is other aerial action all over this week. In Europe on the 13th, 60 American B-17 bombers attack the submarine yards at Kiel. Some 22 of those planes go down in the aerial battle that follows. On the 12th is an air battle near Guadalcanal that Japan loses heavily. The Japanese lose 31 planes, and the Allies lose 6. On the 16th, U.S. fighters out of Guadalcanal's Henderson Field claim they've shot down 93 Japanese planes that have been attacking shipping assembling for the upcoming Allied New Georgia campaign. There is more news about the whole Allied direction of the South Pacific War this week. Today, a directive comes from the Joint Chiefs that they must begin operations against the Marshall Islands no later than November 15th, with the first attacks to be by the U.S. 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions. Allied Southwest Pacific Area Commander Douglas MacArthur protests this, but Naval Chief Ernest King has been growing frustrated by MAC not launching Operation Cartwheel. That operation is a huge thing, with over a dozen sub-operations that is hoped to eventually neutralize the main Japanese base at Rabaul. But the 1st Marines, who held Guadalcanal the first 4 months of the Solomons campaign last year, are retraining in Australia, and MacArthur says that taking them away from his command, as well as 2 bomber groups, will, in my opinion, collapse the offensive effort in the South Pacific area. His cable left Army Chief of Staff George Marshall in no doubt that MacArthur regarded his front as the main effort against Japan, and the proposed operations in the Marshalls as no more than a diversionary attack. MacArthur wants to attack from Australia to New Guinea to the Philippines. Marshall writes back to him and does not endorse Mac's plans as the main ones, but he does allow MacArthur to keep the 1st Marines. The new flare-up in MacArthur's private war with the U.S. Navy had precisely the impact King intended. The general and Admiral Halsey agreed on June 30th as the date when their Operation Cartwheel would begin rolling. However, reports reach Noumea that the Japanese are reinforcing southern New Georgia, one of the first targets of that operation. They're also trying to finish building a camouflaged airstrip that would sabotage any Allied efforts there. So South Pacific Area Commander Bull Halsey will send in the 4th Marine Raider Battalion 10 days before Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia, to secure Segui Point, which is 70 kilometers east of Munda Point, where the Allies have the local observation point under Australian Captain Donald Kennedy that's been providing them solid intelligence. The Japanese airfield at Munda Point, which they finished building last December, is a major Allied goal. See, the whole idea behind the Solomons campaign is to take the airfield, and then once the Allies have major air power in the northern Solomons, Rabaul can be isolated. Taking into account the range of American fighters, they'd have to take Bougainville Island to be able to hit Rabaul with enough force. But sending naval units there would expose them to land-based Japanese planes, and Halsey won't allow that. So first they have to take an airfield in the central Solomons and use that to cover a landing against Bougainville, Munda Point. The Japanese have also been working on another airfield at Vila on Kolumbangara Island, so these two are the focal points in the upcoming offensive. It is the Axis who are planning a big upcoming offensive in the Soviet Union. In the early summer of 1943, a point of balance was reached when each side hoped to tip decisively in its favor. The Russians could not now lose the war, but the Germans could scarcely count on winning. For all the relative quietness of the front, as both sides massed their men and concentrated their most modern weapons, moments of profound significance were passing. Finally, on June 16th, Hitler decided that Citadel, the attack on Kursk, that was to bring a victory to shine like a beacon around the world, the momentous offensive which the Fuhrer confessed to Guderian made his stomach turn over, was to open in early July. Back in April, Soviet commanders Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky convinced Joseph Stalin that their best move is to wait for this Axis attack against the Kursk Salient after having fortified it to cause maximum losses to the attackers. They knew that any attack would be spearheaded by the Panzers and the Luftwaffe's ground attack planes, and they by now have serious anti-tank weapons, and the VVS, the Red Air Forces, just showed in the Caucasus this spring they can challenge the Luftwaffe for battlefield superiority. So those maximum losses would be in armor and aircraft, and then they would make their counterattack. Facing the northern pincer of the Axis attack will be Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front. By now, there are 300,000 civilians digging 5,000 kilometers of trenches north of Kursk. 3 lines of defense were constructed, with the most effort put into the first line. Thousands of mines were emplaced, beginning with the outpost line and extending through the main defensive belts. The Soviets intended to mask their anti-tank guns in areas where they expected the Germans to attack. In conjunction with strong anti-aircraft defenses, these so-called pack fronts were intended to dominate the German armor air support system. In the 13th Army sector, which was expected to form Model's main avenue of approach, Rokossovsky massed 23 anti-tank guns per kilometer of front. That is twice the density what they will have facing the southern pincer. Model, by the way, is Walter Model, German 9th Army commander, who is running the Axis attack in the north. Now, the Soviets dispersed their planes to multiple air bases, all ringed with AA guns, because they expect the Luftwaffe to hit the bases straight off the bat. But as we saw last week, this is not what Model intends to do. He intends to lead his attacks with infantry and local Luftwaffe support. So the Soviets are planning for an eventuality that may well not happen. Still, the Soviet decision to fortify the Kursk salient in depth rather than launch a spring offensive provided Rokossovsky's Central Front was sufficient time and resources to build a virtually impenetrable defense. Model was aware of the extent of Soviet preparations, but Hitler and other members of OKH refused to believe that the Blitzkrieg tactics of 1941 and 42 would fail to penetrate these defenses. And that Soviet 13th Army I mentioned has 12 divisions of troops, 114,000 strong, backed by 270 tanks and 2 divisions each of artillery and AA. 20 kilometers to the south are the 9th and 19th Independent Tank Corps with almost 800 tanks in reserve. Rokossovsky has over 700,000 men total in his front, a 2-to-1 advantage over Model in both men and armor. But though he knows where they're going to attack, he does not know when. In the south, Nikolai Vatutin's Voronezh front has also been busy building defenses in depth along a 150-kilometer front north of Belgorod. The first thing they did already in March was to build a line of combat outposts close to the enemy to prevent them from seeing the main lines of construction. Vatutin has 2 main lines of defense with the reserves in a third. He has also had his men lay thousands upon thousands of mines. In the past, the Germans had simply blitzed through Soviet linear defenses, which caused the defense to rapidly collapse. But the new Soviet defensive tactics anticipated units becoming isolated and ensured that they had the resources to remain in the fight. Stavka believed that defense-in-depth tactics, with minefields covered by interlocking fields of fire, would slow the tempo of the German offensive and force them to fight a grinding battle of attrition. Any of you familiar with my old Great War series will remember how well this sort of defenses worked for the Germans on the Western Front, and even better for the Bulgarians on the Macedonian Front in that conflict. Vatutin has had to spread his main defense over 110 kilometers because he doesn't know if the enemy will attack straight north from Belgorod or along the Kursk-Belgorod railway line that runs northeast towards Prokhorovka. So he has to plan for both. Ivan Chistyakov's 6th Guards Army covers the former, 4 rifle divisions, 129 tanks, and 134,000 mines on a 60-kilometer front in just his first echelon. He also has 573 anti-tank guns in 28 anti-tank strongpoints. Mikhail Shumilov's 7th Guards Army covers the latter to Chistyakov's left. He has a first echelon of 4 rifle divisions and 40 tanks, but a second one of 3 more rifle divisions and 300 more tanks. Kirill Moskalenko has the 7 rifle divisions of 40th Army on the right, and Vasily Kryuchenkin's 69th Army is the 3rd line of defense. And here are some notes to end the week. On the 14th, the Allied Joint Chiefs issue the point-blank directive to British and American bomber commanders in Europe. See, back in January at the Casablanca Conference, the chiefs agreed on the combined bomber offensive, which has been in action. And they've done a lot of bombing of industrial targets, but now they're going to focus on fighter plane factories as well as fighters themselves because the planned invasion of France next year cannot happen without fighter supremacy. On the 18th, the British announced that Archie Wavell will succeed Lord Linlithgow as Viceroy of India in October. Claude Auchinleck becomes Military Commander-in-Chief of India right now, well, in 2 days, but they will create a separate Asia Command. These promotions are Prime Minister Winston Churchill's way of removing the 2 men from military responsibilities because he no longer has faith in them. And something new in the Holocaust begins this week. As we've seen, there are more and more people within Axis Command who no longer fully believe Hitler can maintain mastery of Europe. So Heinrich Himmler, as leader of the SS, decides to increase his efforts to destroy the evidence of the mass murders of Jews and Soviet POWs. And SS Colonel Paul Blobel was put in charge of this massive plan last year. Now the effort will be to dig up and burn bodies from the Holocaust of bullets, right? His Special Commando Group number 1005, also called Blobel Commando, begins work now on the 15th in the death pits near Lvov. Several hundred Jewish slaves are forced to dig up rotting corpses and burn them, though they must remove anything like gold teeth first. In eastern Galicia, more than 20,000 Jews were murdered in the fields and ditches that June, the gas chambers at Bevjec having stopped their work to enable a Blobel commando to burn the bodies, crush the bones with a special machine, and scatter the ashes. And the week comes to its end, with more Mediterranean islands falling to the Allies, the South Pacific War being jump-started into gear, and 300,000 civilians building defenses for Rokossovski. And that's just the northern approach defenses. All told, you have over 500,000 people working every single day to make better, stronger defenses. How much work can one person do in a day? Yeah? Well, multiply that number by 500,000. Remember that quote from a few minutes ago? Hitler and other members of OKH refused to believe that the Blitzkrieg tactics of 1941-1942 would fail to penetrate these defenses. Well, if Hitler keeps pushing back the launch date, and all those workers keep working, then those defenses will soon enough be an impregnable fortress. And look at these names. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Time Ghost Army, and Jonathan McElroy is the Time Ghost Army Member of the Week. But really, they are all civilians helping us build something enormous, the largest and most complete World War II documentary ever made. We could use your help too. Join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. The Army pays for all of our productions, like the War Against Humanity series, which sheds some light on the darkest sides of the war. The playlist for that is right here. Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.